Good evening, everybody. We're going to call the meeting to order now. We'll start with the roll call, right? That's what we always start with. So Becky Beeman.
Sean around.
Russ Beaton.
Here.
Scott Cantonwine. Here. Katie Cincinnati.
Here.
Ken Collins. Ken Collins. Beth Vargas Duncan.
Here.
Bev Ickland. Bev. Matthew Hale.
Here.
Levi Herrera Lopez.
Here.
Stephen Jenkins.
Here.
Kathy Knox.
Here.
Ariel Lovell.
Here.
Malaya Masiba. Lee McKenzie.
Here.
Raquel Moore Green.
Present.
Sean Nickus, here. Keith Norris.
Here.
Jean Palmater. Palmatier, thank you, Jean. Ray Quisenberry.
Here.
Nate Rafen.
Here.
Jesus Resendez. Jesus. David Reinhold.
Here.
Bill Rishi. Bill. Gretchen.
Yep.
Caitlin Strafty. Caitlin. Bill Smalden. TJ Sullivan. And Kathy Van Eckfort. And then if I could get a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
A reminder to please use your microphones.
I turned it off. Do it again.
I move to amend the minutes.
Please state your amendment.
Katie Chonchetta was not included in the roll for last time.
If we could add to the minutes
Yes.
that Katie was present at the previous meeting? Who does the minutes? Who am I saying this to? Okay. All right. With that addition, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes from our last task force meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We move on to the public comments period. Do we have any public comments this evening? Jim Shepke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jim Shepke, Ward 2. At your last meeting, I spoke to you about the sad situation with our public library, the worst funded public library in the whole state, the worst staffed public library in the whole state. Tonight, I bring you a handout that shows what it would take to change that situation. And I want to explain it to you. You should all have it at your place. Is there anybody that didn't get this? Oh, here you go. Give that to him. So what you have here are the peer libraries of our Salem Public Library over here in this column. These are our peers. And this is data for all these libraries, expenditures, staffing, expenditures on collection and service hours. And there's an average at the bottom. So what you can do with this when you look at it is compare the data for our library to the average. And it tells you what we would have to do to become average. And basically, to put it very simply, we'd almost have to double everything. We'd have to double our expenditures, double our staffing, double our hours. That is how we would be average compared to our peers. And on the back of this handout, I put this from your last meeting, the revenue targets and the pathways, and I copied it on the back because I wanted to point out to you that none of these would address this situation. None of these would restore our library to even to average, because they're all about the status quo, maybe keeping up with population growth. We need to do a lot more than that for our public library. And then the last thing I want to point out to you is over here on the right is some very interesting information about how these peer libraries do their funding. So how is it that we are so far behind? And if you look at this, you'll see that every other peer has dedicated property tax funding from either a library taxing district or a local option levy, every single one of them. Corvallis, bless their hearts, has a taxing district and a local option levy. So that gives you a clue of what we might need to do. And I will say, I've been researching the history of funding for our library. We have had 4 or 5 local option levies in the past. We had 4 in the 1980s, 4 in a row. We kept the library funded in the 1980s with local option levies. They typically passed by 70%. So I hope this is valuable information. Thank you. Any questions?
You've got the expenditures at the individual libraries, but you didn't do it per capita or do anything to normalize those because the size of some of these populations served is very different from ours.
You're right. I have that data. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Please do.
I don't think it changes the big picture here. And in fact, you look at Corvallis, they have much smaller population and they spend a lot more than we do. So per capita, they'd even look better. So yeah, no, it doesn't really change the picture. Anything else? Thank you very much.
I do. Thank you for the information this evening. Do you have, when you research the history, do you have, Raquel Moore-Green speaking, when you research the history, do you know why those levies were not continued?
Because the funding in the general fund got better. You know, it was
okay.
responding to the same thing we're dealing with right now.
But in the inverted?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a general fund shortfall. The city went to the voters with local option levies. The library is a very popular service with voters, and they passed it. I got to tell you about Corvallis has their local option levy. It's called the livability levy, and it combines libraries and parks. And it passed last November, the same day we were voting down the payroll tax. They passed the livability levy in Corvallis with a 66% yes vote. So there's great ideas out there. Thank you.
Is there any other public testimony tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next agenda item.
Let me just share my screen. There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for adhering to Robert's Rules of Order already, gold star on those motions today. We have quite a busy agenda tonight, feeding off the work that we have done in the first 2 meetings, as well as the survey you all took in between meetings. I wanted to just remind you to speak into your microphone and to say your name so that the folks on the internet who are watching can know who is speaking. We will make sure that we take breaks, and we aim to get through both a decision framework, talk about our focus group results, and then start really digging into those revenue options today. Are there any questions about our agenda tonight? Bill.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was going to be any time for us to ask questions about some of the documents that you circulated before tonight's meeting, in particular in the question and answer series. Some of us might have some questions.
Yeah, we certainly can. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know when you want to deal with that, but.
Josh, do you think it would be best to do that now or to wait until we get, we have a slide for it? Okay. I didn't remember that we have a slide for it, so we've already planned for that. Thanks for asking, Bill. Jean, did you have a question? Okay. Okay. All right, well, let's get going. So you all remember me, Colleen Rosillas from Moss Adams. Jesse and Tommy are back with me tonight, and we'll be going through all of the materials with you. We've got quite a few city staff here to also answer questions. And we are at meeting number 3. So we're going to talk about our town hall goals. We'll go through what we did in the focus groups over the last couple of weeks, and we'll start really getting into deliberating those revenue options tonight. Any questions about where we are on the timeline? Okay. We initially had scheduled a meeting for June 6th. CCTV was not available, and so we had asked you all for your priorities in terms of rescheduling the June meeting. As a result of the survey that was sent out, June 4th was the preferred option for the group and having it in person. The least popular option was to do it by Zoom. I do not blame you. So we are hoping for a vote, and I can pull back up those options, but we'd like the group to, we'd like a motion and a second and a vote on rescheduling the June 6th meeting to a different date. Back to you, Chair.
Do I have a motion for the reschedule of the meeting?
I so move. Beth Vergus Duncan.
Isn't that seconded? Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? The ayes have it.
All right, we'll officially change that calendar. Thank you all very much. And thanks for not picking the 11th because it is my birthday. Not that I don't want to spend it with you. All right, so we'll go right into revenue targets. And we had a conversation at last meeting around the revenue pathways, which we'll bring up in a moment, as well as the interest of this group in understanding what would happen if we wanted to get up to pre-recession staffing levels. Are there different targets we could look at? So some of that information was in your Q&A document. Basically what we want to do here is say, okay, council says we have a revenue problem and that's why we're here. And so now we want to figure out what will the recommended options do in terms of solving that problem. So we have these 3 targets, the employee retention target, as was mentioned in public comment. That target would keep our current staffing levels, but it wouldn't keep our current service levels, which are already limited, and they don't necessarily match what the community wants. There's maintaining our current service level, so that's that kind of middle of the road service level target. And then there is the 3rd target of continuing sheltering services. Above and beyond that, to increase certain services that are funded by the general fund or get us back to those pre-recession levels is a bigger number that we also can shoot for as we're considering these numbers and deliberating. And as a reminder, this is what the pathways are. So if we are looking at the employee retention target, that's 16.7 million. If we go to the service level target, that's 23 million. And then sheltering adds another 11 million onto that dollar value. Are there any questions about our revenue targets that we're going to be talking about tonight? Yeah, Matt.
Matt Hale. Could you elaborate? I know there was a final draft report released to the council in the last couple of weeks. I think it was done by your organization. It seems like those sheltering target numbers are different in that final draft report. I just looked at it, not completely, but I believe it was in the low $20 million that were actually spent last year. And now, can you talk a little bit about what the real numbers should be? Is it this number or is it the final draft number?
Josh, do you want to address that?
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. So the numbers included here include the city's currently unfunded past the end of the current year and the past the end of next year. So the 3 sheltering sites, the navigation center, those services. There are other services that are provided by the city that have funding, like CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, and Home programs. So those are included in those totals from Moss Adams that aren't included here because they have separate funding. Also, the SOS team, we have funding for a couple of years, so that's not included here. So there's a few different funding sources going on. But what we're talking about here is the 3 micro shelters, and the Navigation Center. And there is some state funding perhaps on the horizon for a couple of those, but we're still waiting to finalize those details.
Bill?
There is also in the question and answer section, the statistic was provided to us of what it would take to bring the city up to the level that the city council would prefer if it had everything it wanted, right? Which I think requires $115 million instead of the $51 million in your fifth option here. Yeah. So if we wanted to pursue that, right, I assume that is also a possibility.
Yes, that is a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
If I may very quickly clarify, so the answer was what would elected officials like? We haven't asked them that question. So this is based on a staff-driven deferred needs analysis that was presented to the Budget Committee and the City Council, but we haven't gotten feedback from the City Council that this is the level of service they want.
So you're saying they might want even more?
I'm saying I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
What I would say to that is the range is really wide, right? We know what it will take to uphold the current minimum level of service or the current level of staffing that the city has. We also know that there are desires, elected officials, individual members of the community, broader groups of the community that might want to increase level of service for different services or just overall, right? And so that the target that you ultimately, or the sources of revenue you can ultimately recommend to council can fit anywhere within that. Matt?
Yes, Colleen, Matt Hale. Just so I want to be just certain on this. So the sheltering target numbers, that's just for the 3 micro shelters and the navigation center. So if I understand correctly, there are funds currently budgeted for like SOS team members and other things that comprise other components of the sheltering services.
Yeah, if you think about the city's homelessness response is not just what was funded with those one-time funds, like the micro shelters and the navigation center, but included in that dollar value in the homelessness study were things like what is the hourly proportional cost of time that the fire department spends responding to calls, for example. They would not stop doing that, right? And that's already covered in the funded costs of the fire department. Same for police, same for federal dollars, like Josh mentioned, for HUD and CDBG that are related to affordable housing. So there's a much bigger number. So this sheltering target is very much focused on just those sheltering services that were the one-time funds. Russ?
Thank you. I think we need to think a little bit about what our overall charge is here. Assume we have a small, medium, and large option, like T-shirts, okay? I'm not sure we should be choosing one of those. Is that the implication? I mean, one way of interpreting our charge here is to show the city what they would have to do to fund any of those. And then it's the city's choice, or the citizens' choice, or the budget committee's choice. And that if we start telling the city how much it ought to have, I don't know that we're doing our charge the right service. But thoughts?
That's a good point. What we really want is to have some agreement on the magnitude so that we know that when we go into option deliberation, that certain options are either not going to get us to this target or they might not be worth considering because of how much they would generate. But ultimately, you will make a recommendation to council that may be one option, it may be a mix of options, and it will be up to council to say what option and how much. All right, let's move on. When you reviewed the Q&A document, anything else? Bill, you already got us there. What questions do you have related to that document that was provided?
Thank you, Bill Smaldone. So I was looking at the document on page 9. in which we are compared to Eugene. And I guess where I have some questions has to do with how they are funding that general fund budget that is about 2.5 times the size of our general fund, right? And with a roughly the same population. Now we know that they have the payroll tax there, and they also seem to have a property tax rate that is substantially higher, right? So does that explain it? What explains it? Because we look pretty pathetic compared to Eugene.
I won't comment on the last one. So the permanent rate that you noted is a big difference, right? $5.83 versus over $7. The line just above that is equally impactful. So if you look at the assessed value, so think of that as your tax base, all the property that's generating taxes. Ours is just under 15 billion, and if you look at those for fiscal year, same year, fiscal year 24, 18.5 billion. So their rate is higher, and then their tax base is much higher. So right there, they're able to generate more dollars. As noted, I believe they also have local option levies, payroll tax. So all that contributes to a much larger general fund budget.
Scott, I saw your hand up.
Scott Cantonwine. I had a question, but first I have a point of clarification. With respect to the general fund budget figure showed for Eugene, can someone on city staff clarify that as a biennial number? So if we're comparing apples to apples, we look at the fiscal year 2024 number of 186 million for Salem, we should be having that biennial number for Eugene?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Then going back to my first question that I raised my hand for, I'm referring back to the document titled Detail on Revenue Options from our last meeting. Is there at any point in time, if we're looking at the overall of all revenue options, that we can get some sort of dollar scale for each option? I understand there's slightly moving target there, but just to understand the financial impact of what each option may deliver.
I think either of us could take that. But I think the intent is the survey that you guys completed was to look at the ones you select in more detail, and that's when we'll get into that level where we're looking at actual dollar values. Right now it's just high, medium, and low, I think.
So later on today, we'll go through that whole list. We have them separated out by your high interest, low interest. We're hoping to maybe toss out some options tonight, narrow it down, so then we can dig in and give you some more accurate data. Tommy, did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Yes.
This is David Reinhold. I have a question on attachment 3, the general fund assumption and trends. I noticed that was basically a breakdown of different revenue sources that the city gets for the general fund. My question is, I didn't see the 911 dispatch center for other cities that use our service.
Yeah, appreciate the question. So this kind of goes back to overall the city's budget's about 750 million. Got to get that right. Of which the Willamette Valley Communication Center is separate. So it's a separate budget, separate fund within the city. So you'll see a 911 tax coming into the general fund, and then we have a transfer that's significantly more going to the 911 center to pay for those services. And in that fund is where you'll see other agencies, the other 27 agencies that pay into that fund.
Just one quick question on the top of page 2 under the ARPA funding. The $24 million, a little bit more than that, that's indicated as revenue replacement, was that all one-time funded, or did some of that go to existing services, existing staff, or was it just one-time purchases?
It went to fund existing government services, so none of it went toward one-time expenses. And I should clarify, that's just for that line. If you look above, like under the sheltering projects, you know, that 4.7 million, that translated into state dollars coming next after that, and that sheltering target that we just saw a couple slides ago. So there were some ongoing services started with ARPA funding.
Any other questions? Yeah, Raquel?
Thank you. Raquel Moore-Green. So further to that, Josh, that replacement, the revenue replacement of 24 million, you said it went for existing services, so to backfill ongoing expenses. And you stated that some of the sheltering projects, which were the new projects that came online, were there other new projects or expansion of staff within any other departments? So were there departments that grew from that 24 million?
No, there were not.
Okay, thank you.
And Beth, I saw your hand up.
Yes, back on the sheet, the general fund assumptions and trends. I may be picking up small amounts, but relatively. I'm noticing decreases in, say, the marijuana sales tax, parking fines, court fines. Can you briefly speak to those? I don't mean to pull us totally into the weeds, but double-digit decreases I'm curious about.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. Marijuana, liquor, alcohol, we saw double-digit increases at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've seen double-digit decreases now. So they've been on the decline. Parking fines, that's related to parking enforcement. We've had an issue with some technology there, and also not as many people parking. Like for the legislative session, for example, there's not as many people in the building, so there's been a decrease there.
But it would go up in next year for a full session.
It could potentially if people come to the session, yes.
All right, are we ready to move on? If other questions come up, we're happy to come back and also answer them because you've gotten a lot of information. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Jesse to go through what we learned from our focus groups.
Okay, welcome everybody. Jessie Lenhart with Moss Adams here to take you through focus groups. So we, as part of our community engagement process, it was really important to reach out to each word individually to get their feedback on some really detailed and specific topics. So, as part of this process, it was discovered that a lot of people have different perspectives on the purpose and role of a focus group. So for you all here today is the intention of the focus groups as they were hosted at the end of February, beginning of March. So we put these together again to really specifically reach out and get feedback from wards specifically. And the goal of this was to guide them through a series of scenarios and topics and polling questions in order to get their feedback. All of this information is going to be shared back to you all today, again, to help kind of inform future decision-making processes, and then help kind of complement the information that you're getting from the city, and then also kind of with the community as that moves forward. So we initiated our outreach to solicit participation in focus groups beginning in the end of January, and it was open through the middle of February. So overall, we had 101 people submit their interest. So different maybe than other focus groups and how they've been run in the past. There wasn't any kind of qualification or application process. So anybody who submitted their interest was invited to participate in their ward's focus group. So we then grouped folks together, again, based on their ward, and held focus groups, 90 minutes, 8 in total. We combined a ward together between February 26th and March 7th. So those results Like I said, focus groups are really oriented at getting very specific feedback on these certain scenarios. All of this is going to be used to inform the discussions that we have here today, and then also our future outreach, including the community survey and town halls. So there were 4 objectives to the focus groups that we walked people through. So number 1 really was just getting a preliminary understanding of people's current knowledge about the state of the City of Salem's revenue standing. Then the second priority, or the second purpose and objective of focus groups really was to uncover people's orientation around the different services provided by the city. Now, it was not going to be feasible to go through every single service funded through the general fund. So what we did instead is we asked people to vote on the city's strategic goals and objectives, because we know that there is a lot of interconnectivity in how the city shows up through its general fund services in achievement towards those objectives. So when we think about what people really value, getting into some of those broader topics and conversations was a really useful way to figure out kind of where people's interests and priorities were when they're thinking about the city and how different services are funded. The third one was assessing priorities for various funding scenarios. So each of the pathways that were explored were shared with the community to get their feedback. What's your take? What's your priority? What kind of goals or targets are folks interested in pursuing? As part of that conversation, and was part of some of the conversations that the task force had previously, we'd opened up Pathway 6, which is all of the above and then some. So really to gauge people's interest in seeing what that might look like. So there's a big TBD at the end of that. That's going to be something that further questions are going to be asked to get people's perspectives and priorities around what that might look like, but wanted to open it up for people just to have the option. In as much as we have the option of do nothing, we want an option of do everything. So really analytically setting the boundaries there. The fourth one was capturing people's reactions to various revenue generating options. So we did not expect anybody as part of the focus group to show up with any pre-knowledge of all the different revenue generating options. There are quite a few and more to be discovered. So instead we asked questions really about what might make people more or less likely to support a revenue generating option, and then really asked them to provide any other considerations that were important for people to know about when we are thinking of evaluating options for the future. What are the things that are going to make them more or less likely to support a different revenue generating option? Key takeaways. So a really big part of the focus groups, they were intentionally designed to be a combination of some discussion items, some questions that were posed via chat. We also had polling questions. I'll give those results to you all as well. And then we asked them to do a little bit of an investing game, which is how we like to gauge people's values around different strategic goals and city services. So in the discussion, a couple of unifying themes really popped up. So there is, number one, a real orientation and desire for more accessible information on where Salem gets its revenue from. We had one participant who had read through, I was massively impressed, had read through all 400 pages of the city's budget document book, and so very aptly said, I am just wondering if there's an infographic or if there is something that I could share with people, with friends, other than a 400-page document, which is great. It has everything that I need. It is also larger than the first Harry Potter book. So if there's anything that we could do, what might that look like? So really thinking about how we could kind of pull up some of this information, really to help kind of drive the city's narrative and the information that it does have already out there. I think something that you all have learned as part of this process is there are pieces of this information out there, and it's really helpful to start having it come together in a way that is a Q&A document, in our pre-read packets, in some graphs, in some tables. So City has done a really excellent job at kind of taking steps toward this, and so what might it look like to kind of increase this trajectory? So the last kind of second tier bullet is also another really big question that came up towards the end. We always ask, is there anything else that you would really like the city to know about? Was we kind of continue towards this path of discovery and proposing different options. And the essential question was, if you raise money, how will you spend it? And so thinking about just not feeling like there was a ton of clarity about what goes into the general fund. And so again, just some knowledge and some education about where do different pieces of money go in a way that is maybe outside or more easy to understand than a 400-page budget document, which is robust and comprehensive and great and has all the data. And it is also very long. It takes a really special kind of person to go through all 400 pages. So thinking about really just asking the question, is there a way to get better information about how money will be spent once it is raised? So there's 2 slides here. I'll go to kind of the next themes, but the last one here on this slide really is a lot of folks didn't vote against the payroll tax, not because they didn't believe revenue wasn't needed, just wasn't the right approach. So I think that was really valuable feedback when we're kind of thinking about how we are soliciting feedback from the community, the types of engagement that we do, why we have done so much community outreach as part of this process already, and are thinking about doing additional community outreach in the future, again, to keep people informed, to get their feedback. And then as we look ahead after recommendations, the what's next. I think we've set a really great tone about getting the community engaged and involved. Yes.
Stephen Jenkins, one quick question about that last point. Was it they didn't like the payroll tax approach, or they didn't like the approach that the city took in putting the payroll tax out there?
It was both. Yeah, didn't like either one. Okay, so it was really challenging for folks, and I think you all have experienced that challenge firsthand in really kind of understanding the full equation. So as part of the focus groups, we really reiterated that there is a more fulsome part to this story. We are talking about revenue generation here. There are other conversations about what may need to be cut. Right? We understand that this is just one part of the full equation when we kind of think of the financial future of the city. So separating those 2 things, a lot of people wanted to dive right into the budget reduction conversation, but we did a great job and everybody played along with our topics and our purpose to get through just really getting a lot better understanding about different revenue generating options. And then the other piece that was really interesting is that conversations around safety, we know that that's a big portion of kind of general fund expenditures, but it's really nuanced for folks in terms of what that looks like. So a lot of very interesting conversations around what that meant for different people in different wards. I think the conversations and the outreach was really designed and very intentional about getting diverse perspectives, and I was really pleased that people showed up with exactly that. So, as we have heard here tonight, and Jim also was a participant in the focus group, so it was really great having him there and then seeing him here today. Library, and it was not just Jim, the library across all focus groups was really important. It was really important for folks thinking about its role in the community and people's ability to take advantage of it, really thinking about how people are able to use and show up, and there's a lot of pride and a lot of love for what the library has to offer. And then parks. A lot of people also really enjoyed just the green space that Salem has to offer. And so prioritizing and thinking about having that be an ongoing part to making the city welcoming and livable, again, part of its strategic goals was really important. So following the kind of 4 purposes of those focus groups, polling question number 1 really, again, was to get that baseline understanding of how people were showing up in these focus groups, right? Without having a ton of all the pre-read information, without having much else out there, we wanted to know where people were at with their understanding of the city's revenue standing. So we got, and I apologize, this color scheme is a little tough to see, so if you be happy to follow up with any of this as well. But really, like you would expect to see in any kind of analysis, we got a really nice bell curve right around the middle. So between a little more than most and a moderate amount were kind of the majority of how people were showing up with their understanding of the city's revenue standing. We only had about 10% of people ready to give a TED Talk, and then another 10%, right, kind of at the bottom with, I don't know much at all. So when we were thinking again about who's showing up and their level of understanding and who's forming kind of their feedback, this was really great to see and not at all unexpected. Our next question really focused on understanding people's different perspectives on the full equation, right? So having those conversations, getting people's perspectives on the belief of should the city and their thoughts, should their city be solely considering options to generate revenue? Should we be doing both, generating revenue and making some cuts to services? Should we be only cutting services or the full spectrum in between? And then also the option for people to say, I don't feel like I know enough to have that information, which is also very insightful, right? Thinking about what might need to go out to the community in order to help enhance that level of understanding. So again, right, that bell curve, the majority of participants were right in the middle. So 38, almost 40%, said that they believe that the city has a shortfall and thinks that both services should be cut and additional options for generating revenue should be explored. And then almost an equal amount, right, that 35% said the city has a shortfall, and folks were only interested in identifying ways to generate more revenue and not interested in figuring out where cuts need to be made. So again, just kind of informing and helping to kind of shape the conversation of where the community is at in terms of thinking about that full equation and what people are interested in. So then the next question really goes back to the pathways. And because this is on a PowerPoint slide and it only gets so big, I'm actually quite pleased that Jim provided that handout for you on the back. In case you need a refresher, are each of the pathways that were outlined. So folks were, as you can see, really evenly split in terms of figuring out what target do we want to go for, and how much does that look like. So apologies, we're not going to have the focus groups decide for you today which pathway for you all to pursue, but hopefully more information will come from the community survey. Folks were all across the board. So lots and lots of different, right, and diverse perspectives on what makes sense for the city to pursue when we're thinking of these pathways. And then, I see your hand, one sec. And then we did open pathway number 6, is that all of the above and then some. So what might it look like for the city to pursue all of the different choices, maintaining staff, growing services in proportion to the population, and also providing sheltering services, and also kind of restoring and enhancing services in certain areas. We didn't ask what those were, but wanted to get people's insights on what that potential and if there was any interest there. Yes, Becky.
Becky Beeman. I appreciate seeing this data for the whole city altogether.
Yeah.
Was there anything that was surprising in what you found in individual wards?
Not so far. We were really interested at this first layer of really looking at what the whole picture looked like, and so that ward level analysis hasn't been dived into yet. So, but when we look at the whole picture and how this is going to impact the whole city, that was the first layer of focus. But that's a great question. Yeah.
Scott Cantonwine. What, if any, demographic information is there to identify kind of the leanings of the focus groups?
When you're thinking about their ward, male, female, age, all of those kinds of things?
All the above.
Yeah.
Is there any information on political affiliation? Is there any information on do they own or rent their home? Do they live in Salem and work outside of Salem? Do they,
yeah,
all those sorts of dynamics?
Yeah, we did gather that information. Great questions. Yeah.
Raquel Moore Green, so will that information be made available to us?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, it sure can. And Raquel, you're invited to occupy the seat in front of the microphone. just in case. If at any point you are invited. Great. So one of the discussion points that we're going to have with you all today is potentially gaining a little bit of consensus around a decision-making framework. So we know that we have quite a few revenue options to explore and evaluate moving forward. When we think about putting all of those together into a menu of sorts in order to help this city in order for you to be able to provide recommendations that will meet different targets or different pathways, part of the conversation is going to be what criteria is going to be helpful when we are evaluating and assessing the different options, like I said, because there are so many of them. So we asked focus groups the same thing, based on their level of importance, to rank the following criteria based on what was most important to them. So it looks like the numbers didn't match, weren't flipped with the rank. So we will update that. The criteria is in the correct order. The rank is actually flipped. So apologies. So sustainability, the one-time versus ongoing, is in fact correct. That was the highest ranked of most interest and importance to people. So that's the 2.4. Equity, that's the regressive versus progressive tax measures. That was the next highest importance for focus group members when they're thinking about how to evaluate and assess different revenue generating options. The estimated revenue potential of each option was the third most important for focus group members. So thinking of the low, medium, high, or just that dollar amount, which I heard being a point of conversation amongst the group as well. Impact on local economy, the environment, then legal viability, and then the impact timeline. So this was something that we didn't ask you all, but for the focus groups, we were interested in how important it was for them to know that something could be realized in the short term, in the midterm, or in the long term. So really understanding the full portfolio when it comes together, what could be enacted now, and you could expect to get near-term results, what is worth putting energy into to achieve kind of that longer realization horizon. And then the last one, people were not actually very interested in whether or not things worked in other cities. So there you go. And we'll put this up again, and I think it's in the right order, against the results that you all provided via the survey. It is. Confirmed. It is. So then this was our investing question. And so we asked folks to play our investing game. They had $600 Monopoly dollars to invest in the 6 cities' strategic goals. So we gave people a little bit of time. And again, this was oriented towards understanding where people's values lay in terms of how services of the city showed up in the community. What did that look like? And so the number one area that most people invested in was a safe community. And so again, thinking back to those takeaways, what a safe community meant was different and was nuanced for a lot of people. It was everything from well-lit parks, well-maintained streets, to a presence of police and fire, quick response, of emergency services and emergency preparedness, those kinds of things. And then kind of the second highest area was a safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure. So that was another really interesting one. So thinking about the how the city's facilities are maintained. So really big orientation towards making sure that infrastructure keeps pace with growth. And then the third one was having a welcoming and livable community. There was a lot of conversation about how all of these really intertwined and intersected with each other. So lots of conversation around, can you have a welcoming community if you don't have a safe one? And what does that look like for different people? There were a lot of different perspectives on what that meant for folks. So we always like to play this investing game just to see where people's kind of priorities lie and then their understanding of what this looks like when it comes to the city's strategic goals and how it shows up for them. So any questions? Next up, we're going to get into the decision-making framework, but any kind of questions about some of the focus group results? Yeah.
Matt Hale, how strong was what you alluded to earlier about the participants wanting to make sure that any revenue generated went to specific items, or they could track how that money was spent, how it was used, and things like that?
I'd say it was about 50-50. It really showed up kind of more towards the end of the conversation. There was a trend in some of the feedback that we got where there was just a desire to know. A lot of folks felt like, well, I pay my taxes and go into this general fund, but then what does this general fund do? It seems like it covers a lot of things. It seems like I might not necessarily know how it changes or how it flows, and just would love to learn more and have it be more easily accessible about how that's portioned out. And then really, when we asked the question about what might make you more or less likely to pursue a different revenue generating option, understanding what that money would be used for was a high priority for, I would say, the majority of folks. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Sean Nickus, would you say from these results that people were more likely to be open to any type of tax, not just a levy, but any type of tax that had specific funding goals attached to it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We didn't get into, I didn't ask the specifics, again, because we didn't expect people to know the difference between a levy and a tax, kind of based on how they were showing up. But there was an overall interest that folks would be more likely to support in either of those options if it was associated with something that they could say, I see how this then shows up in my community. Yeah.
So Keith Norris, related to that, right, that last poll you showed of kind of the city's goal areas.
Mm-hmm.
How much explanation were they given about what each one of those things meant, right? So in terms of, you said it was interesting to kind of see what their understanding was of these and how they believe this stuff shows up. Well, how did they believe that, right? I mean, like, where does that get into? Because I could make each one of those things basically say the same thing in terms of its delivery, right? And so what is the vision there in terms of that? Was there data collected on that? Not that I expect you to outlay all that for us right now, but like, do we have that information in terms of those services they wanted to show up in funding these particular areas?
We didn't dive into the specific services and how they showed up in each one of the areas, but what we did do is we provided them not just kind of the 2 or 3 words that you see on the screen. It was an overview to say when we think about a safe community, that mainly refers to public safety, police, fire, emergency preparedness, and response. Yeah, so there was a little bit more than just 2 words that we did give folks. Great questions. All right. So next up on the agenda, we're going to chat with you all about that decision-making framework. So thinking of and through all of the 41 options, plus the 5 additional ones that were chatted through during the last session, we want to make sure that and talk with you all about putting together and agreeing to a criteria that can help shape how you evaluate, assess, talk about, prioritize the different revenue generating options into the future as we kind of shift from this information gathering stage now into getting a little bit more input from the community, coalescing around different revenue generating options. We did our first pass. Later today, we're going to talk about, like Colleen said, potentially kind of scraping out of the bottom, saying, great, these ones we can kind of remove from further consideration. These are the ones that we really want to think about and prioritize evaluating moving forward. When it comes to things like how the level of importance or whether something is worth pursuing through analysis and the whole way, this decision-making framework and criteria is going to be really helpful to put numbers to some of the opinions that folks have about the level of importance for those different areas. Yes, Becky.
Becky Beeman. I found when I was going through these, there's only one of these options that I definitely said yes. I'd take money from the state for their buildings in lieu of property tax. Most of the rest of them were maybes because so much depends on how it's implemented. If you implement the wage tax all the way down to minimum wage, I got issues. But if you made it a place higher up, are we going to be able to make those boundary condition contingencies stick to the options?
Yeah, so we're gonna go through all the ones that had the lowest interest and talk about those exact things and then agree to as a group. Does it make sense? Could we say, yeah, it doesn't feel like this is worth pursuing or diving into that level of analysis for these ones because it's just a non-starter. All right. So we asked you to rate the level of importance that you associated with each of the different criteria. So the most important for folks, 70% of you said it was highly important to evaluate different options based on their ability to generate ongoing revenue over one-time revenue. Next up is currently legally viable. So that was also very important for folks. Congratulations. You get to stay on the task force. The next one was equitable. This one really kind of fell between highly and moderately important, looking again at the difference between regressive versus progressive structures. And then in the following is where we start to see some not so importance pop up. So have widespread negative impacts on the local economy. That one kind of started to shift. It's moderately important, mostly with a little bit of high importance. And then negative impacts on the environment. It was a very interesting, that one kind of got a little bit of all three. And then kind of moderately important, requiring that administrative effort. So again, kind of thinking to that implementation and the return on investment. If it costs us more to implement it, then we are going to gain in revenue. Is it worth it? And then the last one, again, very low interest, 20%, not important at all, is if it's been proven to work elsewhere in Oregon. So we did math for each one of these. We ranked, we assigned numbers into each of the levels of importance. So highly important was given a 3, moderately important given a 2, not important given a 1. We added them up and divided them to get the weighted scores, which gave us kind of that priority ranking in terms of criteria. So again, sustainable, legal, equitable, not negative impacts on the local economy, not negative impacts on the environment, administrative effort, and then proven to work elsewhere in Oregon, or how you all ranked the different criteria options. So putting them up against kind of what we learned from the focus groups. So folks, kind of resoundingly, there's a lot of agreement between these two groups on this sustainability. So a very high level of importance placed on whether or not different options can create ongoing revenue sources versus one-time options or things that may need to be renewed or go up for a vote kind of periodically. Then there was a little bit of a difference. So equity came in second for focus groups and came in third for this group. And then we didn't ask this group because it was a little bit of a gimme, but we did ask the focus groups about how important the estimated revenue potential was for each one of these. So that was very interesting that ended up third and not first. So just something to kind of take into consideration when you're looking at this decision-making framework. The local economy kind of ended up impact on the economy and the environment ended up in similar positions for both this task force and also the focus group. And then legal viability for the focus group, kind of lower towards the bottom. The other thing that we asked focus groups is that impact timeline. So again, when results would be realized and their level of importance rated on having near-term, mid-term, or long-term impacts or results. Then everybody agreed, we don't really care whether or not it has been successful in other cities. Lower level of importance. We care a little bit. Not as much as the other ones, though. So, anything in these results surprise you? Any questions that you have when you're thinking about putting together a decision-making framework using this criteria to evaluate different options moving forward?
How would you assess impact on the economy? Thanks, Nate.
Yeah.
For instance, some of these, wouldn't we have some other tasks downstream before we make
Yeah.
that decision?
Yep, economy and environment
Partly, I'm an economist, so I really want some advice here. How to behave in case I ever get a consulting job.
I'm going to call Kai Risdal and have him call you back personally. Yes. I also met a brilliant economist working with another project who lives in Oregon. So his name's Dallas. And I think if you're going to be an economist, you just automatically get a very cool name like Dallas or Kai. So I'll have them give you a call. But that's a good question, right? So impact on the economy, to what extent is that being evaluated and understood and measured? And then also impact in the environment. To what degree are we also evaluating that when we're kind of putting together a decision-making criteria? Because it could get very, very nuanced very quickly. Yeah, it's a great point. Yes.
Was there any discussion in the focus groups about the breadth of our tax measures? So, for example, should it only be residents of Salem, or could we also tax people from the outside? Did they talk about that at all?
No, not in the context of who should be taxed. A lot of the conversation we were thinking about who this might apply to actually centered on entities that use the services within the city. So thinking at, there's a lot of conversation around the legislative proposal out there to recoup some funds for services provided by the city of Salem. And then there was also a lot of conversation around kind of Salem's unique real estate environment, housing a lot of government offices, not-for-profits, a lot of other entities that would be exempt from other property tax. And so thinking about how that might compare, you know, not whether or not revenue generating options are successful in other cities, but what their real estate kind of landscape looks like. So that was the conversation, but we didn't get into who should be taxed or who it would apply to as people, as residents or users. Okay. So, thinking about using this information, one of the things we'd like you all to discuss and then ultimately vote on tonight is if we were going to potentially adopt a set of criteria that can be used to evaluate different revenue generating options in the future. So the discussion for you tonight is what, if any, changes would you make to the proposed criteria? And so of the two options, we're going to start with what was provided to you in the survey and then maybe talk about the other two options that were asked of the focus groups. So that estimated revenue potential and then also the impact timeline, if those are important or if they are not important to include in a decision-making criteria. And then if there is anything that you feel like shouldn't be included in a decision-making framework as criteria. Yes.
Could you talk to us a little bit about how you envision us using this decision-making criteria in terms of when we get to those revenue options, right? Like we've got this rubric, how are we filling out this rubric? How are we using it to kind of move forward in that decision-making process?
Yeah, great question. I would love to tell you. So we had envisioned using this criteria really similar, honestly, to how a risk assessment gets put together. So you have each one of these categories, and then within each category, you would have different options of, some are binary options, yes, no, and so that would be associated with a number, a score, similar to how these were ranked using kind of those weighted averages. And then thinking about for the other ones, putting them against kind of a low to moderate, moderate to high impact, and then having each one of those pieces. So really starting with this and then building out each of the different options within it and then assigning those a number so that then when we are kind of talking through a lot of the different revenue generating options, we can put these pieces together, end up with a score or end up with a rating or a ranking that can be used to start putting them into a prioritized list. These ones are very viable. These are the ones we want to pursue. These are the ones we want to fold into a recommendation. So then you can start grouping them together and start to understand what needs to come together in order to hit some of these yet to be determined targets. there will be visuals in the future. So let's start the conversation with looking at the two other criteria that were proposed to the task force, or to the focus groups, I apologize. So estimated revenue potential and then impact timeline. When you think of including that as kind of a criteria to evaluate different revenue generating options against, does one or both of these feel like they're important to include in kind of a rubric? Yes.
I mean, the short answer is yes, but I mean when I think of something like the estimated revenue, like if we're after the cost of collections, if we're looking at things that are under $1 million, it's probably not worth our time to even just have that in our discussion, is from my point of view at least, and maybe even in a higher number than $1 million. And then the estimated time, when you look at the there's things we could do, say like urban renewal districts. We could say, let's get rid of the urban renewal districts we don't need right now, make that as one of our suggestions. And that's like $3 million, and that's something that can come back, as my understanding of it, very quickly into the city budget. But long term, you know, that's a horrible decision for a city to make, to not have urban renewal districts. But in the short term, it could be actually a really good decision as other things ramp up, because it's going to, I mean, most of these that have any significant revenue are not going to be around in year one or even probably year two of us doing this. So anyway, that was my thoughts on
that. Scott Cantonwine. Just returning to the question that I asked earlier with respect to revenue potential aligned with each proposed revenue generating option. That's just basic business analysis. I don't think we can judiciously consider any one of these options without saying this, even if we have a range, to know this is what this option, I'm just going to pick on franchise fee increase. This is going to raise $5 million. This is going to cost $1 more million to administer. The net gain to the general fund is $4 million. If we don't have that information, we're just playing house.
Right. So using that as an evaluation criteria, that's a great point. Thinking about, is there any threshold that would be too low where it would cause a different option to be discluded or excluded? Oh my goodness, y'all. Excluded. Is there a threshold that is too low to where where an option would be excluded from a recommendation? And if the answer is no, there is no threshold too low, as long as it would result in a net gain for the city, then you could think about including it as, then you wouldn't need it as an evaluation criteria. It simply is a part of the analysis, which I think is what you're getting at.
I think that goes part and parcel with, if we're using sustainability as a criteria, part of analyzing the long-term sustainability of option A, option B, option C is knowing how much estimated can this generate.
And that sustainability talks specifically about whether it would be a one-time thing versus an ongoing revenue generating source. Yeah.
Becky Beeman, I think maybe if you did the scorekeeping without those two factors and then laid them out into a plan and said, well, these would give you income quickly, these would not. This one is a small thing that's at the same time as some big things, so let's toss it because it's more trouble than it's worth. That might be the time to do it, not in the scoring part, but in the putting together of a whole picture.
Yeah, exactly. So what are those pieces that you want to make sure that are under consideration when you're putting together your menu? Yeah. Yes.
Beth Vargas.
I saw, Beth first and then Keith.
Beth Vargas Duncan, I agree.
Thank you.
This is Keith Norris. I was going to actually disagree a little bit in the thought that you could have, in terms of the rubric situation, right, have one of those scores be, does it raise less than $1 million, then it scores 0. If it raises 45, 50 million, then it scores 5, right? And have those various ranks there. Because I think that, to one of the earlier points, right, if we can get money in quick, the fact that it's sustainable or not doesn't necessarily matter as much, right? If it can get quick in the door, we can have that $50 million input over the next 2 years as a one-time deal. That might sustain us into the future. So I think it could fit into the rubric, and I'm not sure there's necessarily a threshold that's needed if you have a way of assigning the score value in the rubric to those various funding buckets, or the various funding levels.
And then the question is it overcomplicating things to assign a score to different revenue if we're not excluding, got it right this time, if we're not excluding any option just based on its revenue generating potential, part of the analysis will automatically be, what does this generate over time? And so if it's not going to be something that's used to evaluate or eliminate different options that don't meet a certain threshold, then it might not be useful to have as part of the criterion.
I'm not sure, I agree it wouldn't necessarily be useful for eliminating, but I think in terms of ranking the various criteria, that could be useful, or at least as useful as some of these other metrics on there.
Yeah. Jean, I saw your hand go up and down really quick, and then, and then Bill.
Go ahead, Jean.
Jean Palmetier. Items 3, 4, and 5 are somewhat subjective, and would our analysis have enough information to actually provide sufficient information to score them at all? So equitable, I can see looking at things like people's incomes and house value and all that, but local economy, I'm not sure how that would work, and impact on environment equally so. So they're very important, but I'm not sure how we would measure them in a meaningful way. That's my comment.
Yeah. And when you say 3, 4, and 5, you're looking at the ones under the task force criteria?
The task force, yes.
Okay, great. Bill.
Thanks. Bill Smaldone. I think it's really important to have the estimated revenue potential in whatever way was described. I think just we need to know that. But the thing I'm interested in knowing about is the difference between the impact timeline and the level of administrative effort. So is the impact timeline simply how fast it will take to deliver cash, right?
Exactly.
But that does not include the impact on the administrative staffing. That's a separate
Exactly.
thing. Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
So the administrative time is the simply the administrative burden of administering whatever option that is, a tax or a levy or any of the above. Yes. I see Matt, and then Russ, I see you next.
Matt Hale, I agree sustainability probably would be my number one, but I would broaden the definition. I would argue that the definition is not just recurring or one time, it's also how the community sees those funds spent and what's that impact in our community. And to me, that would mean not putting those funds into the general fund, but having some type of controls where they can be audited, have a specific fiscal code attached to them, so the community can see that they're being spent for police and fire and ambulance, or they're being spent for the library, or they're being spent for parks, those kinds of things. So I think that you, Jesse, talked about that the 101 participants, stress transparency, and they stress being able to see where those funds that they're going to reach into their pocket to give to the city, where are they going and what are they used for, so they can see what they're being used for.
Yeah, Tommy.
Hello again, everybody. Tommy Conkling, Moss Adams. One point of just clarification, the sort of the exercise why we're all here, is necessarily about the general fund. So just a point of clarification in that you could conceivably have things with revenue options saying this revenue is going to go to fire, this revenue is going to go to police, and you could have some of that control, but it's unlikely to be outside of the general fund itself. So you could still have it in function, but just wanted to make sure that was clear.
forgive me, that's not clear to me.
Okay, that's
My
fair.
understanding of general fund monies is that can be moved by the council from one pot to the other within the general fund, from police and fire to parks or to whatever, depending on the will of the council. Now, if you were to have some kind of, say, a local option, right, to fund one or the other aspect of the general fund. So say the library gets a certain amount of general fund money now, and then we attached a local option to that. That is, we raised the local option tax to supplement the library. That money, that is the supplemental money, cannot be used for any other purpose.
I'm going to defer to Josh here, but I believe you're correct.
In the case of a local option levy, you're right, it'd be dedicated. However, the ballot language was written. It doesn't mean it can't go in the general fund. We have restricted funds that go into the general fund. They get used for their restricted purpose. It's kind of a gimme. We have to audit in it anyways. What we would do in this case, if there was that additional requirement, you could say, hey, we want the auditors to specifically look at this use of the funding to validate that it's been used for its proposed purpose. It is problematic to move things out of the general fund unless it's a whole service. So if you were to say, okay, this is to fund the library, and you're pulling the whole library out, that works. If you're saying, hey, we're going to fund a portion of the police department, it doesn't really work because part of them are in the general fund, part of them are out, and you're still moving money back and forth.
Right. So may I follow? So,
yes, and then I'm going to redirect the conversation kind of back towards the criteria that can be used, but yes.
I don't want to complicate anything. I can stop. So.
I think this is good. This is good conversation, but I think falls a little bit outside of that decision-making criteria. So when you're looking at these pieces, right, ultimately, at the end of this, we're going to come up with, if you want to hit this target, here's kind of the menu options of revenue generating options that we propose. And so at the end of it, you'll be able to say, we propose X, Y, and Z because we rank them based on their sustainability, legal viability, how equitable they are in the community. We did a little bit of analysis. Here's what we understand about their impact on the local economy, the impact on the environment, the level of administrative effort required, and then whether or not they're used in peer cities. And so when you're thinking of going through all these 41 options and taking 41 and going down to kind of the menu of what will help folks achieve this target, these are kind of the different evaluative criteria that you want to be able to say, we recommended this because, we evaluated it because, we looked at it because. And so when you're talking about that communication piece and that need for people to understand kind of where dollars are going based on the different options, that is one where you could look at it's just a layer of variability that you could apply to any option moving forward. And so rather than using that potentially as an evaluative criteria, it could be a signal for communication to the community and those kinds of pieces. Keith, I see you jumping out of your seat. Yes.
Static. Totally agree on the communication side. One of my questions on the criteria is on the sustainability term, and I'm trying to recall the survey we were given in terms of how that was defined. But I think, one, the ability to generate revenue over time, but I also think a piece that if it's not captured in that category that we should consider adding is the ability of that revenue stream to grow over time with Salem's population, right? So how can, for instance, if we put $10 as an operations fee, that's sustainable, but it's not necessarily growing over time.
Yep.
Depending on which revenue source we're talking about.
Yeah, and that time horizon would be part of that revenue potential analysis. Yeah, great question. I saw Sean, and then I saw Nate.
Well, I mean, I realize that 1 through 4 probably speak to this in some ways, but should political viability be a criteria that we would consider?
Would you ever eliminate something in the recommendation process based on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would, yes, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. I mean, that's an open question. So I heard a yes. I also heard another yes. Yeah. What do folks think? I did see, I want to make sure that Nate has a chance, and then, yeah. And then I saw also Kathy and then Bill.
Nate Raffin. So a few committee members have discussed that we have some revenue options that are, more sustainable long-term, and then we've got others that maybe are less sustainable but can bring in cash quickly. And I just wanted to make the comment that I think given the scope of these deficits, that it would be wise for us to consider having some of those shorter term options just from a cash flow perspective.
Yeah.
Just to make sure we don't forget about those. That's all.
Building a diversified revenue generating portfolio. It's good business. Scott's going to be so happy. I saw Kathy and then I saw Bill.
Kathy Knock. I think we can all agree, because we haven't been talking about it, that we can eliminate use in peer cities as part of the criteria. We're not going to toss a revenue option because somebody else used it or didn't use it. So I think we can eliminate that option. And I'm also thinking that based on the level of conversation, we're all in agreement that the estimated revenue potential is valuable as an evaluative tool, and the impact timeline is also valuable. We may toss something if it's short-term or long-term, but we might not. So I think we have to have both of those things, and we don't need use in peer cities.
Great. I'm going to grab my notebook so I can take notes. I've been seeing a lot of head nodding. So when we kind of vote on a criteria, I'll have all of that. I saw Bill.
Bill Smaldone, this is to the political question. Every one of these items is politically fraught. And so we could be here a long time having political debates, and it's really the council that has to make the political decision about whether to go forward with any particular set of recommendations. So I think that our job is to use the criteria that we work out here to present the absolute best revenue package we can to the council, and let them then make the decision make the political decision about whether or not to accept it.
And I'm glad you said that, Bill, because that was part of a larger conversation that we had about this process and how then there are going to be several touch points with the community to determine. So when we are thinking about political viability, how are we assessing that? How are we understanding that? So we aren't going to put all 41 different options out to the community to vote on, because that is too much for any. It is the 7th Harry Potter book. If you thought the budget book was big, then the information packet that would go about for all of these to kind of determine or suss out the political viability is going to be one that would be it's not feasible at this point. But what is going to happen after this, right, once the recommendation is posed, then I imagine that a number of additional community outreach efforts in order to get people's feedback on the different options will be something that happens in the future. And so it is just kind of narrowing down and getting more targeted insights to get people, right, really kind of clarify what we're asking folks, get very targeted, be able to provide them with good information to get a better understanding of that exact thing. Yeah, so it's a good point. And Kathy, it was a really beautiful summary, so thank you so much. So peer cities out, impact timeline in, and estimated revenue potential in. I think any other kind of discussions about what might be out or what might be in, just as a criteria? Yeah.
Stephen Jenkins. So I've been thinking about the focus group criteria and our use of it as an evaluative tool in terms of how we want to exclude or include things. And I know the question around demographics was asked, and I guess I'm just realizing now what has been on my mind is asking the question of who maybe wasn't at the table at those focus groups. And I know you may not want to go through all the demographics, but I'm just curious if there were any groups that were not represented well in those focus groups, and how we might assess that information in terms of how we weigh the value of these focus groups as well.
Yes. Total population of city, so Salem, minus 101. people not asked. But you bring up a really good point. And so when we're thinking about using this decision-making framework, again, this is just kind of one part of the process. So when we're thinking about how we might be able to use this information as we're evaluating things, this isn't the only opportunity that we're going to have to get people's insight on different revenue-generating options. And so we have town halls coming up, we have the community survey coming up. So those will be other opportunities to get people's feedback. But when we think about this group and your ability to make a decision as a team, it can be something that's just a helpful way to just get a snapshot understanding of kind of where the community might be at. But you're absolutely right. It is not mutually exclusive or comprehensive in any kind in terms of how it represents the city. But when you think of folks that might or might not be ruled out, like I said, there wasn't any kind of qualifying process for focus groups. We really were focused on just kind of making sure that we had representatives from each ward. So we didn't, yeah. Yeah, Russ.
Here we are. Is that on? Russ Beaton. The equity one, I take seriously our charge that says go out in the neighborhood and see what you can learn, you know, our own little focus groups. I had two neighbors together that I respect very much, both professional people, retired. What does equity mean to you? One of them said, well, and they agreed prior to that, equity is very important, fairness, okay? One of them said, well, everybody paying the same percentage of their income. The other guy said, no, everybody paying the same amount. My point is, equity is in the eye of the beholder. Do we as a task force need to get that a little straight among us?
Yeah, and so that would be part of the next round when we start diving into, great, when we know that equity is important as a criteria, what are we including in terms of understanding how we are ranking these things? What definitions are we applying so that we can be really consistent with what that looks like, and then how we're communicating that to the community. Yes, Nate.
Nate Raffin. So it was suggested that and maybe this is arbitrary, that if there's a funding source that raises less than $1 million, let's say, that's like net positive revenue, less than $1 million. Are there reasons why, if it's less than that, or pick a number, are there reasons why we wouldn't pursue it if it is a net positive?
You all tell me.
I'm just curious, and maybe you can edify me.
Well, I mean, there is a reason, and it has to do with the impact timeline. I mean, as Russ would say, there's a net present value to the dollars, and so they're more valuable immediately, and the hole we have to fill is smaller immediately. So yes, there's a reason. It's the impact timeline is why you'd consider some other things in the way you've stated it.
Becky Beeman, so you wouldn't kick it out because it's only $1 million. You'd kick it out because it took too long. So my concern is, I think that 15% of our shortfall is not inconsiderable. So the number by itself isn't necessarily a reason to chop it off. If you add in other factors, that makes sense.
And so I'm going to jump in really quickly. When we're talking about the evaluative criteria, is at the end of this, if you have those two options, you have one option that's going to get you $5 million tomorrow, and then you're going to have one that's going to get you $50,000. No, you're going to have one that's going to get you $5 million in 5 years. But you're going to have one that's going to get you $50,000 tomorrow. How should those be ordered in terms of what we are recommending? So, exactly. And so that's when we apply the criteria, when we are thinking of, great, we recommended this because this is kind of where it falls in terms of putting together this portfolio of recommendations. So once we kind of have those pieces together, we can see, oh, okay, it looks like these ones are scoring somewhat more on the lower end for kind of a combination of reasons. And so maybe these are not ones that we would kind of recommend moving forward, because these ones are scoring more highly when we're evaluating them against these. And so this is what we would kind of think about putting together in terms of a recommendation for council. Yes, Nate.
Nate Raffin. So maybe just more clarification.
Sure.
And I know you said there are no dumb questions, so I'll press the limits on that.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Colleen
Okay,
said
so,
it.
If a revenue source is relatively low and it will bear fruit further down the road,
Yeah.
Is there something inherently about that means we shouldn't consider it? Because it seems like even if it bears fruit years from now, that it should still be considered. Am I wrong?
And that'll be something that's part of the future discussions, right? So this just helps us be able to know where all of these things are falling in order to facilitate those discussions about how we kind of come together with each of those pieces. Bill, I saw you. Okay, never mind. Great. Okay, so we have, in Kathy's excellent summary, peer cities out, impact timeline in, revenue potential in. When we think of using these in order to have that discussion about how we are ultimately coming together and putting together our recommendation in the future, does this feel like a good set of criteria that could help you have those discussions, or is there anything else that is missing? Yeah, Raquel.
Thank you. And this does not answer your question. I want you to know that. Okay, I had hoped to be able to ask this before you got started.
I'll allow it.
Thank you. So we're talking about revenue to offset expenses. And there's not been any discussion about the interlocal agreements that the city has the ability to do with the state under ORS 190110. And I think I'd mentioned that earlier at one of the initial meetings. And so I'm just curious as to when we're looking at revenue, because based on the House Bill 4072 that did not pass, that died, that would have put something into statute to benefit the city of Salem, that was right around $7 million, which I don't think is anything to sneeze at, to be quite frank with you. And I'm curious as to whether or not this is going to also be aligned with what it is that we're recommending to council.
Yeah, I think that intergovernmental agreements, I saw that added as a one in the survey, and it's included when we start looking at the high, moderate, low interest options. Yeah, great question. Okay, we have one decision before your first break. Is there anything else that we would add, or does this feel like a sufficient set of criteria to evaluate future revenue generating options, to have the discussion about what we might recommend in the future? Those being, again, sustainability, one time versus ongoing, legal viability, what is equitable to be defined by the group between equity and fairness, impact on local economy, again, to be defined and determined by the group, impact on the environment, level of administrative effort, impact timeline, and estimated revenue potential, excluding use in peer cities. Yeah.
Becky Beeman, I remain concerned about how boundary conditions will play into things like equitable. Sure. Like how far down on the income level do you go? That will really determine your score. And so I don't know where that comes in and where we get to decide where that boundary condition stands.
Yeah, that's a great point. So for tonight, we're committing to say that figuring that out, we need to do. And then in future discussions, figuring out, great, what does that exactly look like? Yeah, it's a great question. All right, then I think, yeah, Scott.
I would like to move that we vote to adopt the task force criteria as described.
Great. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion on the floor that would eliminate number 9, use in pure cities, but keep all the rest. Isn't that do I have a correct understanding of that?
Love it.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Everyone opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Welcome to your first break. We'll take 5 minutes. 10 minutes? 10 minutes. We'll take 10 minutes and reconvene at 8:14.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for rejoining us after that break. You engaged in some really in-depth discussion over the last hour and a half. And I want the record to show that Bill Rickey is joining us. Bill has been here waiting patiently for a moment when no one would pay attention to him sitting down. So we are going to go through some of those initial revenue options based on your packet, based on the survey that you took. The goal for this discussion is to get to some consensus on maybe some low interest options that we can toss out. And then the high interest options, consensus on those, so we can really start digging into those criteria that we talked about. If we have time, we'll go through those moderate ones, but we didn't necessarily expect to get through everything tonight. So if we get through those first two, that'll give our team quite a bit of direction for the next meeting. So as a reminder, we gave you a giant packet last meeting of 41 options. We provided that electronically as well as in Excel, so you could sort and spreadsheet, macro to your heart's content. We also, in the survey, asked you for additional options that you were interested in, and those are presented moving forward in our results. We had you all rank them from 1 to 3. I'm not interested. I'm more interested in this. And what we learned from the survey is we have kind of a bigger spread around those areas where we had higher interest. But on the low interest, we had some consensus. And so we'll go through those, and we're hoping that we can make our work a little bit easier by that tonight. But these are the everything, all 41 that you voted on. And then there were 5 extra that are in that lime green that we added that we'll talk about tonight. All right, so here are our lowest interest options. Tolls on the 2 Willamette River bridges. Not a surprise. Payroll tax, employee paid payroll tax, a solid waste collection fee, establishment of a street lighting district, a bicycle registration fee, fees for first responders and rental housing, and then a sweetened beverages distributor tax, AKA a soda tax. I would like to know your questions and thoughts about this list of 8 options. And Bill, and then Jean.
Well, here's my first thought. Bill Smaldone, I move that we remove all of these options from our list.
We have a second from Russ. Chair, would you ask for discussion, please?
Yes, could we have, I have discussion? Jean?
This is just a comment. I've been going out and about and talking to my neighbors, and I went to the neighborhood meeting. And independently of anything I had to say, several people approached me about rental housing fees, especially related to non-empty houses, that they felt that it would be fair to, this is not a big moneymaker, mind you, it's a comment, but the idea that the police have to constantly and fire are monitoring these houses over and over again, at least in our neighborhood, it costs money. And so they thought that that might be something we could add to our list. To my comment.
So that would be something more akin to a vacant housing fee?
It's on the list. Yeah.
That's included separately.
All right. Does anyone else have discussion on removing the revenue options on the screen? Becky?
Becky Beeman, I had number 29 as a keeper, but I'm willing to hear anybody who says, tell me why it's not a keeper.
Yeah. So if I might speak to my motion, right? It seems to me that all of these are either regressive, right, or actually would add very little revenue to our efforts. And I think the rental housing fee, while one might think, if that's to be levied on the landlord, that would probably just go right through to the to the renters. And right now, renters are being driven to the wall here in this town. And so I don't know if rental housing is the way to get at them. There might be a better way, but not with this proposal.
And Ray, was your hand up?
Yeah, right, those are pretty much what Bill just said. That were my thoughts. So, thank you.
And
Sean
for
Nickus,
those
is there any other
online-
discussion? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, his mic was off, but he said he agrees.
All right. For removing all the, everything that's currently on the screen, all the numbers currently on the screen, vote aye if you agree.
Aye.
Nay to disagree. The ayes have it.
And that's where Robert's Rules really gets the job done. All right, here are high interest options. We have 9 listed here. So we are going, I'm going to go bottom up, so the most interested. So payment in lieu of taxes from state government, as discussed before our break. Additional intergovernmental agreements, so county, school district, other government entities. Payments in lieu of taxes from the county and federal buildings. Corporate income tax, local option property tax levy, local marijuana tax increase, a cigarette tax, annexing the developed areas within the urban growth boundary, and business license fees. We'd like some consensus from the group on these being high interest that we'll delve into, get all those criteria from, so that we can talk about it at our next meeting. Ray.
There we go. Ray Quisenberry. The payment in lieu of taxes from the state government, I like that idea. It's a wonderful idea, but I don't know if we have much control over that. I mean, the city has said for a long time they want to do that, but it's really up to the state government.
Agreed. And there is, to some extent, if these have to go to a vote, the political feasibility is unknown, or we can estimate through the town halls and the community survey what the community's appetite is for, I would say, these kind of top 3 intergovernmental agreements and payments in lieu. You have to get the other entities to agree. So it can be something that's recommended to council, but we can't rely on council to adopt it. They could just ask nicely, or not so nicely. Sean?
Well, it's my understanding that local marijuana tax increase, that is not a power of the city at this point in time. That would take legislative changes from the state of Oregon to increase it. Am I wrong about that?
That's correct.
So, I mean, on that, I would recommend that we don't continue to consider it as one of our highest or best options.
Sorry, Bill, your hand was up?
No, it's okay.
Raquel?
Thank you, Raquel Moore Green. To Sean's comment, I don't know that they should be removed as much as we should recommend a legislative agenda to the council.
Beth?
And on that note, Beth Vargas Duncan, I would be sad to see the payment from the state removed when there was bipartisan support. I know we're not going to talk about this politically, but I like the idea of a legislative agenda recommendation for financing.
Thank you. Other questions, or Stephen?
Stephen Jenkins. I can't help but note the local marijuana tax increase, and then looking at the potential revenue, and then it's actually decreasing by double digits. And we also know from news reports that marijuana, there's a glut of marijuana actually right now, and it's not getting sold. So I just, well, it seems popular. I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on that one. Cigarette tax, while that feels good in some senses, it's also incredibly regressive.
Thank you.
Just an observation. if we annex all the land out to the urban growth boundary, we just basically continue the problem with the property tax. I mean, that is looking to the property tax to solve our problems. And the property tax is a dying venture. So it's just something to bear in mind if we want to pursue further discussion on that.
You tipped your hand a lot there. So
It's not the first time that has happened.
You're correct that an annexation comes with revenue, but it also comes with developed land that services are expected. And typically an annexation doesn't really go well if you say, but you'll continue to receive a lower level of service, right? We want to give folks a reason to join the city. So unless you're growing and building new housing stock, a property tax does ultimately have a limit at a current rate.
So doesn't that come out, sorry, Becky Beeman, doesn't that come out when you do the analysis of that option and it turns out that it's a lesser revenue source because it's got all those costs associated with it?
Yeah, and you'll notice that the ones with the A's in front, those were the ones that were added. It wasn't in your original packet. So we didn't include it originally because it might be a wash. It might be a slight increase, but it's probably not going to get you to one of those targets that we have identified. Kathy?
Kathy Nuck, if I'm understanding the question that you're asking us is which of these options do we want you to do a deeper dive on?
That's correct.
And the government ones, is there a deeper dive on them, really? Like equitable, like environmental impact on a state payment? And I don't understand
That's a good question.
What you would be researching.
It would look a little bit different. And so I'd say, for example, sometimes in other communities where there's we want a payment in lieu of taxes from another governmental entity, the county could say, well, great, we're going to move half of our offices out of Salem. Or everyone's teleworking, so fine with us, we'll close, right? So that there could be some economic impact from making that decision, from then not having folks coming and working here, right, and potentially spending their money in other ways. So that would be something to consider, but it wouldn't be the same criteria as a tax that would be on a household or an individual or a business. You're right.
Thank you, Becky.
Becky Beeman, I don't want to get led too far down the primrose path. I see that we're getting rid of 10 and we're identifying 10 as high interest. What happens next? I'm not sure I want to sign off on just 10 if the next one is, and that's all we're going to work on.
We have 3 slides of moderate options to go through. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, Bill Rickey. Bill Smaldone, you had a very good point, I thought, regarding a fee for rental homes, that would just get pushed down to the renters, which would be tough on them. I would suggest that we all use the same equity lens when we look at business licensing fees and corporate income tax. I think those are things for the small businesses in this community that would have an impact on those employees in terms of their benefits, their ability to have raises, the ability for those businesses to continue to thrive in this town. It's already tough. We already have a state corporate income tax that hurts businesses as well. So I think that you use the equity lens really well there, and I think we should continue that. Probably with all of these, but those 2 in particular, I think are detrimental to our community.
Kathy?
Kathy Knock, I just want to bring up on the business license fee, there is an advantage from a public safety standpoint of being able to gather information about the businesses that will help first responders and help plan reviewers. So it's supported by employees, not just for a revenue perspective, but because of being able to better, more efficiently perform their jobs and provide public safety information to first responders.
Thanks, Kathy. So, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So I would like to suggest, I'd like to make a motion to remove the cigarette tax and the local marijuana tax increases from the list. And well, that's my motion.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor. To clarify, this would put them on one of the lower lists that we're going to see on the next slides. I realize they won't be on the slides tonight, but we're not removing them entirely from discussion. We're moving to a lower slide.
Yep.
And was that the intent of your motion?
Sure.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor to move the cigarette tax and the local marijuana tax to one of the lower slides, so it won't be the high interest revenue option. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Nay. From what I hear, the ayes have it. Are we doing abstentions? Abstaining from vote? Am I asking for that? I haven't asked
You probably
for it.
should be asking, Dan's not here. You should be asking for that.
Okay.
But there weren't people who were saying I abstain, so I think you're okay. But going forward, let's do abstaining. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right there. Thank you.
I didn't hear that.
If we run into a situation where you need to do that, an abstaining, our friendly city attorney's office representative will let you know. So you've been doing a great job, actually, and I was wrong.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so I also heard that discussion of we can recommend a legislative agenda to council. So in terms of those three that are listed, payments in lieu of taxes, intergovernmental agreements, do we want to put those in sort of a separate category?
Excuse me.
Yeah, Gretchen.
Number
Sorry, Raquel. You're Gretchen.
A4 doesn't need to be put into a legislative agenda. I mean, that's something the city should just be doing, to be quite frank with you.
Okay, so just payments in lieu of taxes and potentially marijuana tax increase. Anything that would require going to the legislature, we would kind of put in that legislative agenda parking lot. And we don't have to limit it to these, but perhaps that's just something for future discussions, is if we know it would require the legislature or another government to agree with it, then we want to put that in a kind of that separate category and keep that for consideration.
Does someone want to make a motion to that?
Becky Beeman, I move that we put options A5, A2, and 21 into a separate legislative agenda package for the council to consider.
Do I have a second to that?
I think it's A15, A5, and 21.
Yes, friendly amendment.
15. Okay. Do I have a second to that?
Second.
Any discussion? Yeah.
So I think to clarify Becky's motion there, she said to put into a recommended packet for council, and I guess my thought is I don't know if we're ready to put that packet together for council at this point, but to do more analysis on that as a separate evaluation.
So it would create a separate slide moving forward, essentially.
Love those slides.
Beth?
Could you please repeat the ones that we are including for a proposed legislative agenda that would go to?
Let's see if I can do it right. 15, A2, and 21.
I'm going to correct that again. So local marijuana tax increase, A5, which is payments in lieu of taxes from county and federal buildings, and then 21, payment in lieu of taxes from the state government.
Gotcha. You see, I can't do it right.
Is there any further discussion? Did you change your motion? No. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, I believe Bill seconded it. Oh, okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
Great. All right, we'll move forward with these other options as high interest options and start digging in. We're just about at 2 hours here. So what's your appetite to look at some of the moderate ones? We'll keep going. Nate?
Nate Raffin, my appetite is high.
All right. I'm seeing some nods. All right, so we'll look at these moderate options, and these are actually ranked from kind of least to most interesting. So this is, I would say, your second lowest slide. And we have 11 options on this slide. Land value tax, a jointly paid payroll tax, a property tax on vehicles, a private foundation endowment, a general sales tax, permit fees for electric vehicle charging stations, a restaurant tax, admissions and entertainment tax, a heavy vehicle tax, which doesn't benefit the general fund, personal income tax, and transient occupancy tax increase. So we can, as a group, if there's some you want to throw out, or if you want to note that they're high interest to you tonight, we can bump them up or we can take them down. Nate?
I do have a question. Nate Raffin here. Given that your time is valuable, and I think we have around 41 items to consider, what is realistic in terms of you guys doing deep dives on this? Is it realistic that you can do a deep dive on half of these or 20? What, do you have a sense for that?
What do you think, Tommy?
I'm gonna have a very dissatisfying answer for you. The answer is it's complicated. It really depends on which are selected. Like, I think this was already eliminated, but the bicycle fee tax, right? We would have to we'd have to probably talk to vendors, find some sort of data available on bike sales, try to estimate how people are going to move elsewhere. So very more complicated. Something like a local option levy, there are models, most of which, or if not all of which, I don't know exactly because that's maintained by the city, the infrastructure of such a model and predictions are there. So my apologies for a dissatisfying answer.
That's okay. Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. Would it be wise for us then to request a closer look on more, and then we can kind of whittle it down from there, given those time constraints?
My suggestion would be maybe we take those first 6 or 7 that we had on the prior slide, and we do that deep dive into those. Maybe we provide a moderate level of analysis, so a little bit more information for some of these more moderate interests, then we can dig more into them. And so maybe we could I'll go in the other direction. How about that? Yeah, so those were the lower interest. So these are your second highest interest bucket, basically. These were 2.0 and above. So we could have that same discussion. Do we want to throw out any of these or bump them up to high interest? That would give us a pretty good list of maybe about 15 to start with for next meeting. How's that sound?
Yeah, and just thank you. And just a quick thought, just operationally, it might make sense, as you put it, to do a medium dive on some.
Yeah.
And give us more information, and then we can maybe think about doing a deeper dive if it's warranted. Is that what I'm gathering from you?
And once you have the deep dive into the high interest areas, that will also give us a sense when the information is in front of you. It's always easier to react to something. So then you can say, I want more information like this or less like that. Sure. I'm assuming everybody is agreeing with Nate just based on general body language. Sean?
Well, I'd like to remove the land value tax. If anyone, I'll make a motion if anyone wants to second it, and we can open discussion.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion and a second. I'm sorry, Jean, did you want to say something?
She switched slides.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm confused.
I just moved to show you what these are your second highest options. So the ones that we were looking at them, so there are 3 slides. Yep. So these are the next bucket up from the low interest.
So,
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
okay. So to speak to my motion, land value taxes would require state law changes. They are complex, and there's a pretty good chance that actually they wouldn't have the effect people think that they would have. And I could get into a more detailed discussion of that, but I would recommend that we not consider a land value tax. It's a lot of work to end up at the same place we are now, because it would not allow us to actually increase property taxes by even $1.
Russ?
Russ Beaton, I think Sean's correct. A land value tax is basically going to be a new method of taxing, and it isn't clear without talking rates whether it would drive revenues up or down. It's a taxation method that we would have great difficulty implementing in Oregon anyway.
I believe we have a motion and a second, so.
We have a motion and a second. We're in
prudent to
discussion
vote.
of it now. Just any other discussion of the land value tax?
My only comment is I'd be for removing all of these except for the transient occupancy tax. So I'm in favor of the motion.
Okay.
Open to more removals.
Any other discussion on the land value tax? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Bill?
The one tax on here that I would like to move that we move to the high interest list is the personal income tax. So that
Second.
So may I speak to the motion?
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Certainly, as making the motion. Yes.
So in thinking about what we discussed before and looking at the results of our priorities, many of these taxes on the list are flat and regressive. The personal income tax can be, but can also be progressive, right? And so that can be progressive, and it can bring in large amounts of revenue. And so if equity, right, and large amounts of revenue are what we're thinking about, then it seems to me that that ought to be one of the items at which the city is looking, a deep dive should be taken.
Any further discussion on the personal income tax moving up to the high interest slide?
Russ?
One of the things I hear a lot from citizens is unhappiness with the complexity of what we do, all the little fees and things. And that's almost independent of how much we raise to those. There's an irritation of the tax structure. The income tax is probably the only one on the list that has the capability of being a structural change and allowing us to simplify our tax code considerably. And obviously, I've heard everybody say they don't like regressive taxes or that we shouldn't prefer those. And it's virtually the only one that you have a freewheeling opportunity to change the progressivity yourself. So I'd favor the motion.
Any other discussion? The motion is to put the personal income tax on the high interest list. Seeing no other further discussion, all in favor of placing it on the high interest list, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Hang in there, Sean. We'll probably have some votes that aren't unanimous.
And
Beth has a comment. Yeah.
Beth?
Vargas Sunken, I would suggest you do ask for anyone who might abstain.
Certainly. Are there any does anyone wish to abstain?
I do.
Are we recording abstainers?
Becky?
I'd like to move the property tax on vehicles to a higher level so that it can get some assessment. The information that we got in our packet was, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. I have lived in a place where property taxes on vehicles was assessed. It was progressive in that the more expensive vehicles were assessed higher than the cheaper ones. So if you're living in a junker, you're not going to owe much money. people who were only in the area because of military service were exempted. I would bet that students are as well, since they don't have to license the vehicle. But some more looking at it, I think, is of merit. There are a lot of cars in this place, and the people who have 12 new pickups ought to pay some money.
What is the motion? Please clarify.
Becky, could you turn your mic on?
Thank you. To move property tax on vehicles into a higher interest.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to move the property taxes on cars to the higher interest. Discussion?
I'd like to, ask just one clarifying question on Becky's point or hypothetical regarding the person with 12 new pickup trucks. I think that begs the question, would this be a personally assessed property tax, or would this be assessed on business vehicles as well?
I think that the best way to deal with that would be to look at someone who does it and see how they do it. I think it would be different for businesses, but I do know that cars got cited for not having the sticker. That was how they enforced it.
Beth Vargas Duncan, I mentally lumped this in a bit with the luxury consideration, so I don't know if we want to consider that now or later, but you know, cars, boats, by consumers is the way it is under the luxury tax. So I think that would not apply to business, but we could explore that.
And perhaps this will come out in the medium interest assessment, but I believe for most businesses who are accurately reporting personal property, that is already being taxed by the county, so we'd certainly want to avoid a double taxation just to remain an equitable place to do business.
Bill?
I think it's important to note that there aren't a lot of car dealers in Salem, so I guess, Becky, I wanted to ask, is this at the moment of purchase or at registration?
In the places where I've experienced, it is like registration, where it renews periodically, and as the value of the vehicle drops, the amount of the assessment drops. It's not a purchase. It's not something the dealer would be responsible for.
It's my understanding that would be, if it's a registration, that's at the state level, not the city level. Is that right?
Where you would register at the state level, but you would buy a sticker from the city. It is assessed periodically. It's not. It's. Do you have the 2024 sticker? And the city could issue 2024 stickers.
In my experience, it would just be part of your license or tab fee. Yeah. The state would remit it to the city, likely.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Abstention?
We're gonna have to do a show of hands.
Abstaining? All right, well, in this case, it would be division of the room because I don't know who won, so.
Yeah, can we do a show of hands for aye and nay, and then we'll
Yes,
do
so
count?
can we have a show of hands for the ayes? And then a show of hands for the nays?
That's 7.
And a show of hands for those who wish to abstain?
4. So the ayes have it by 1.
The ayes have it. Very good.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, Ray.
Ray Quisenberry. We are voting now to move these from a moderate to a high interest category, but we're still going to have a discussion about them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, whether we move them or not, we're still going to try to decide and have this whole debate. So I just wanted to point that out.
There was a motion earlier that didn't move forward to eliminate all these. So then, as we go through, the next one that I heard was transient occupancy tax that was brought up before, but I would anticipate there's going to be a motion coming up to eliminate the others or move them to the back burner.
I'll make that motion while we're sitting without anything to discuss. I'll move that we eliminate the remaining options on this list except for the transient occupancy tax.
Do we have discussion on that?
Nate?
Is it reasonable to assume, so Nate Raffin here, okay, so we've got a high priority list. We are also voting to remove some of these items. Is it reasonable?
It's a low priority list.
Okay, yes, and this is lower priority. Is it reasonable to assume that anything that has not been upgraded or removed will get a medium
dive?
Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Jean? Yes. We've kept property tax on vehicles and personal income tax, and then there's a discussion of transient occupancy tax and eliminating the rest. Becky?
Becky Beeman, could someone speak to the merits of the transient occupancy tax moving up?
Beth?
I'll speak briefly to that. My knowledge is old from when I worked at the city. But the transient occupancy tax is a tax on any accommodation within the city for persons visiting or staying in a hotel, motel, Airbnb, any of the like. And the way I recall the state legislation was created, the state takes a portion which essentially capped what the city could collect. So in my mind, talking about increasing the transient occupancy tax could be interesting as a part of our legislative agenda, perhaps, or an IGA with the city or with the state. If we start talking with the state that, hey, we think you should pay us $7 million and here's a menu of ways that you could do it, that's just a thought I have.
A portion of the proceeds goes to Travel Salem, so as part of that destination marketing. The greatest benefit to a transient occupancy tax is diversifying your revenue sources because it's based on who visits Salem. If you had a highly tourism-dependent economy and you were very dependent on it, then that might not be a good idea. But as a diversification source, I mean, the city already has it, so it would just be increasing it. And Josh wants to add to what I was saying.
Just real quick, Josh Eglin, Chief Financial Officer. It is generally restricted to tourism, so it generally wouldn't help the general fund problem. But it's also capped in charter, so it would require a vote. Just a little context.
Let's do Bill and then Beth.
Thank you. First, the question of clarification. So if this suggestion passes, then the items that we are on this list, except for the ones that have already been moved up, disappear, or we talk about them later in a less, in-depth way?
So I think we have two choices. There's a motion to disappear them, like the previous low interest slide. They also could simply be moved to, these are low interest, but we don't want to get rid of them. And it's okay to not make that decision tonight, too, if we know the ones you're really interested in, and we can table the rest of these, except for land value tax, which you voted on not moving forward with. We don't have to completely erase them if you're just not ready to do that.
Thank you. I raised this question because in looking at the list, one of the taxes there, the restaurant tax, is a tax that we once had in Salem. It was passed in the council 20 years ago. It met with relatively little popular opposition. It was repealed by the council that followed. But it was a tax that brought in a substantial sum and met with relatively little popular unhappiness. The point is that that's a relatively easy one to implement. It's relatively painless. I wouldn't actually favor it if I had my druthers, but it might be something we want to consider down the road, and I am hesitant to remove it from the list. The rest of them, as far as I'm concerned, can go.
So Bill, I think to answer your question, right, when I say remove, and that was the motion on there, I think that being said, we're a body that can make any motion at any time and bring these back, right? So the goal here is a prioritized list, so we don't have a Harry Potter book number 3 to read through in preparation for our next meeting, right? I think the goal here is the prioritization, and so these being we're working from bottom up, right? These are the bottom ranked ones based on the survey that we all provided, and so the goal here is to deprioritize that. If we want to call that eliminate or don't look into further right now or whatever terminology you want, we always, as a body here, reserve the right to bring anything back forward via motion that we want.
Russ, and then Becky.
Following up on what Keith just said, is one thing we're doing right now is instructing you as staff or as consultants what we want you to work on.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And I think then I support what Keith just said.
Becky?
Becky Beeman. This particular one, the restaurant tax, is another one of those that has very little information in our packet. And getting more information in the nearer term, I think, is of value to us in determining whether to toss it away. And specifically, we don't know how much revenue potential it has. And we have a voice that says it had significant revenue potential before.
Ray?
Yeah, Ray Quisenberry. Actually, getting back to the restaurant tax, we looked at that 6 years ago, and we didn't recommend it at the time, but as I looked at my old information, it generated about $9 million. So it's significant. I think we should probably keep that.
Stephen?
Stephen Jenkins. As I look at this list, one of the ones that are listed is the sales tax general. And when I look at the evaluation of it in our packet, it's a high revenue potential, more viable. I know we're in Oregon. I'm a lifelong Oregonian. I know it's not popular, but I also remember vaguely from a long ago political science course that Oregon has instead of a tripod tax system, we got a bipod, a property tax and personal income tax, and no third leg, which means we've always had a pretty unstable taxation system in our state. So I think maybe. Believe me, I'm not excited about it, but I think it would be unwise to completely disregard it at this point.
Sean?
Oh. Keith, would you like to amend your motion to not include the restaurant tax? It's up to you. Sure. Okay. So we have Keith has amended his motion, so now the motion is to remove everything except the restaurant tax and the ones we've already put up. The amendment does require a second, yes.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay. So,
I second the original motion.
yes, yeah, okay.
So do you second the amendment?
Sure.
Okay, is there any further discussion on this now?
So are we ignoring, sorry, Becky Beeman, are we ignoring the comment about sales tax?
We're not ignoring it, but we didn't put that one in, since most people seem to be talking about the restaurant tax.
Is that because we're being old school?
I believe she didn't have her mic on, so it's because it's 9 o'clock. So how about this? We know what you're interested in off of this list. Maybe we table this motion for our next meeting, because there's 2 more slides of moderate interest, and we might want to just take some more time. Raquel?
Thank you, Raquel Moore Green. So do we get this slide deck that
Yes,
you've presented?
yes.
That would be very
Yeah.
helpful, thank you.
We'll
And in
send
the
it right
future,
out.
could we have them when we come to the meeting so that we can follow along?
Yeah,
Is that possible?
Would you like
Thank you.
printouts? Oh. Okay, yes. Yeah, we'll do that for you. Yeah.
So would you like to vote on the motion or vote to table the motion? That's where we've been set to
I vote
now.
we table it.
You want to vote to table it? Okay, to the next meeting. That requires a vote to table.
Becky Beeman, I've moved we table this motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those
I
opposed, say
don't think we need
nay.
a show of hands for that one. Okay.
Hearing no nays, the ayes have it. The motion is tabled.
It is also my bedtime, so I'm going to take us home. And so we'll be running a community survey, statistically valid community survey. We'll also be holding 2 town halls before your next meeting. So we'll send out all this information to you. We'll be at our next meeting providing the feedback on those, and we'll be providing information about the town halls as well, so you can attend and round up your folks. And Matt, you had a question?
I was just going to ask if you could send out a quick email maybe tomorrow with summarizing which ones we voted into the high interest.
We can do that. All of us took notes, so we just have to compare them. Okay. Could we get a gavel to adjourn? Thanks so much, everyone. Great job tonight.